Welcome, Dan. It's so wonderful to meet you. I've been waiting to meet you for a while, and I know obviously you're a big player in the finance area. Obviously, we focus on FinTech, so we've had a lot of VCs that are focused on that domain. I was wondering what your passion is, what brought you to being a venture capitalist, and what areas you like to invest in.
Sure. I mean, the way I would describe our areas of focus are, kind of fintech and, kind of commerce. Those are the two areas that we're focused on. What originally brought me to VC was, candidly, just a love for the startup ecosystem. I get a bit of a contact high from being around entrepreneurs, and I imagine that, if I had been, kind of more technical by educational background, it would have been fun to have been a developer and an entrepreneur and building companies, from scratch. But I think I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to get into venture early in my career and have just really enjoyed it all the way through. And I've been really lucky to be able to work with some amazing entrepreneurs and other great investors. And so that sort of reinforces the excitement about doing the job. So, yeah.
What's so cool about the Bay Area and Silicon Valley is that a lot of investors I've known over the years, some have taken like little breaks and gone off and done a startup,
Totally.
and sometimes some don't come back to venture. So it's really cool the way that the table can be flipped if you want it, and you can do a startup if you want to do that. So
Yeah, and I think that's probably, I think you see that more now than you used to. So I've been doing venture now almost 18 years, and if you go back 10 years, it really was kind of, people were, kind of in one bucket or the other for the most part. And then maybe at the end of your successful entrepreneurial career, you might get into venture at that point. I think now it's much more fluid, as you're saying. There's a lot of people moving in and out of EIR roles, venture partner roles, taking, trying their hand for a few years as a venture capitalist, maybe raising their own, sort of side fund to invest while they're operating. So it's a little bit more blended for sure.
And I was wondering where you think things are going, because obviously you guys have an enviable seat at the table, an overview of the whole startup ecosystem. Where do you think lending per se, mortgages are going as far as the future goes?
Yeah, I think so. So one thing's for sure. I mean, the financial services ecosystem, especially consumer financial services, are getting increasingly digital. So that represents a really interesting opportunity for improving user experiences for consumers, and companies that are sort of latching onto that, whether they be incumbents or kind of new fintech startups, I think are being rewarded in terms of new user growth, new loans originated. But fundamentally, the biggest challenge in the space is that being a lender actually requires access to capital. So one of the things banks are particularly good at is sort of aggregating low-cost capital through deposits and other sources, and so it does create a bit of a competitive advantage relative to fintech startups in the alternative lending space. So I think that'll create an ongoing hurdle for kind of startups to reach sort of independent, freestanding status as public companies and really be direct lenders. Where you see, I think, models that have a little more scalability are some of the enabling platforms. So companies that are helping the traditional incumbents really digitize the experience, improve the experience for the consumer, for the borrower, and create that best-in-class or nearly best-in-class user experience for, to really kind of digitize. So.
And just as a little aside, I'm noticing being in the grassroots of the ecosystem, the fintech ecosystem, and with venture capitals, that there's been a bit of a sea change just since the summer, really. And I'm wondering how ICOs are affecting your business as a VC.
It's a good question. I think it's definitely too early to tell. We haven't seen it really affect us head on. Because I think the biggest impact of ICOs has been for fundraising for blockchain-related startups and companies that are operating in and around the crypto asset space. And those are interesting spaces, but super early. And I think there's some question about whether or not using tokens as a fundraising kind of mechanism and ICOs as a type of token issuance. There's some question about whether or not that will be widespread into other categories of technology beyond blockchain-related technology, whether or not people will create sort of token-linked securities, so that you're actually issuing a compliant security, but it's just kind of linked to a token. So it kind of depends, I think, which direction kind of this evolves, and it's been although ICOs have been around a while, it's really only been the last 9 months, 10, 11 months that they've been sort of really becoming popular. So I think we'll wait and see.
I know that I was reading that the hedge funds, there were 9 up until August. Since August, we have now over 120. So there's something definitely has happened, and I'm really seeing it in the ecosystem. So obviously, like you said, it is focused on the crypto currencies and the blockchain startups, but still it's massive, and it seems much bigger than what happened when crowdfunding started. So
I think that's right. I mean, but the difference too that you have to sort of key into is that crowdfunding, which is a cool concept that I think was meant to create access for investing in private companies for the broad U.S. public, and more broadly than the U.S. obviously, but at least in the U.S. But what's occurring in I think the crypto space and with blockchain related ICOs is you have a whole bunch of people who've made a lot of money on paper, and actually even sort of somewhat liquid in sort of crypto assets, and they're playing with the house's money. So they're looking at the potential to see other sort of exponential growth investment opportunities in these token sales or pre-sales. And there's a reinforcing mechanism there too, because the people who are early in Bitcoin or Ethereum or Litecoin, or sort of name your sort of crypto asset, they're influential, right? People respect them, so they often get offered sort of pre-sales at discounts, and so there's almost a guarantee for a credible ICO. There's almost a guaranteed bump for the token pre-sale purchasers. So that's good for them because they make a nice bump, and depending upon the lockups, they might make some really good money just in that alone. I'm not sure if it's good for the people who are then giving them liquidity and buying the tokens from them at higher prices. So I think that's where the question, that's sort of what I worry about a little bit.
And a few investors are jumping on board with the ICO investments. How have you noticed it as far as your colleagues go?
So are you asking about us specifically? So we have yet to invest in a token, and currently our fund structure doesn't support us investing in tokens. I know a number of VCs are actually actively seeking to change their fund structures to permit token investment. And I think from our perspective, we're actively thinking about where we want to invest in the ecosystem. The challenge of the ICO or token sale as an alternative to venture funding is that that amount of liquidity and lack of dilution creates a pretty sort of enticing alternative to dilution from equity financing. And I have to say, as a traditionalist doing this as long as I have, I prefer to own equity in businesses. And
so it's more risky for VCs, really.
I think what it's leading to is bubble's a strong word, but it's leading to an inflation in sort of pricing, and so the opportunity for VCs to invest in equity in these businesses is almost always sort of at the very, very earliest of inception stages. So I think it is riskier for sure when you can invest in the equity, and then from there on out it's all about buying tokens.
Yeah.
So.
Look, lovely to chat with you today, and I'm really looking forward to this panel. I think it's going to be very interesting. Thanks for coming.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Yeah.